A routine patrol turned deadly near Houston when a police officer killed an unarmed woman.
Now allow me to interject real quickly into this video. He made the claim that the officer shot an unarmed woman, but the statement from the officer is that the woman had taken possession of his taser. Now a taser may not be a knife or may not be a handgun, but it is a weapon nonetheless that can play a significant role in a dangerous situation. So I hope you take that into consideration as you watch the rest of this video.
The shooting happened late last night in Baytown, which is about 25 miles east of Houston. As Laura Podesta reports, the deadly confrontation was caught on cell phone video. We do want to warn you, some may find the scene disturbing.
Cell phone video captured a routine police patrol at an apartment complex in Baytown, Texas. It quickly escalated when an officer confronted a woman. Moments later, the officer pulled out his taser and the two got into a struggle. Eventually, the woman wrestled the taser away from him.
If somebody's tasing you it takes your taser away from you and starts tasing you, there's a very good likelihood that it's going to escalate and get very bad for the officer from there.
During the encounter,
Now, I would like to say that I'm clearly in agreement with that. If someone takes the officer's taser away, it can become a problem. It could change an entire encounter, and it can escalate it to the point to where the officer's incapacitated. Excuse me, to the point to where the officer's incapacitated, and that individual could end up obtaining the officer's gun, and it could ultimately lead to become a deadly force encounter. No question about it.
45-year-old woman is heard telling the officer she's pregnant as she falls to the ground. The officer pulled out his gun. Residents who heard the...
Sorry about that. I just wanted to back up the video real quick. Back up a few seconds here.
The officer pulled out his gun and fired 5 shots, killing her.
Now, there are people who are making a reference to the fact that she was pregnant. And that's assuming that what she said was truthful. Now, this might be shocking to some people, but the reality is, in the job of law enforcement, you get lied to. I mean, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but you get lied to every day, countless times. I mean, it's like people give you half truths, distortions of the truths, or out and out blatant lies. You hear almost every time you come in contact, anytime you have a potential crime or a situation going on, you get lied to all the time. So assuming her to be truthful, that might work in some aspects of the world, but in police work, just because someone tells you something, believe it or not, doesn't make it true. And if it had escalated to the point to where he felt like there was a need to use his taser, now we can debate and discuss that, and I plan on getting into all that here very soon. But let's dispel this whole idea that, well, she said she was pregnant, so then she is pregnant. That's nonsense. Let's wait till the autopsy report comes out so we can determine whether her claim was true or not.
Residents who heard the...
Now, I'm going to back up and rewind the video here at the point of the shooting. Clearly, this news broadcast didn't show, obviously didn't show the scene, the point to where she dropped after she was killed. But I want to make a couple of points here. Let me back up. Let me make a couple of points here of concern. First of all, if what was stated was true, when I read in a few articles that the woman had warrants and the officer was familiar with her, so he stopped her to see if those warrants were active. He found out that they were. So he decided to take her into custody. She began resisting. First and foremost, the officer had a legal justification to be there. So let's dispel any problem anyone may have there. He was legally in his right to be there and to make contact with her. As in law enforcement work, if you patrol a specific area, you start to know who's in your area, and you start to develop a relationship. I'm not saying become buddies with people, but you know who's who. There's some regulars that everyone has in their area, in the area they patrol, and you start to understand who's who. And if you maybe there was a morning briefing where they referenced that someone has a warrant, then when you're out doing your patrol and you come in contact with that individual, you'll stop them and you'll verify it and you'll take them into custody. It happens all the time. And if what's being stated is true, then there's no argument in that aspect when it comes to that. Let's address the fact that let's address her actions towards the officer. I don't know what's going on lately in our culture, in our community, in society, but it seems to me that if there is an officer-involved shooting, there seems to be a tendency lately for people to completely ignore the actions of the citizen. First of all, if you're committed a crime or have had committed a crime, and then you become combative when the officer attempts to take you into custody, you open the doorway to all kinds of problems. One of the biggest ways to avoid placing yourself in a violent encounter with a police officer is to comply. Now, there's some people that would say, "Oh, you're just doing what the officer wants you to do." You know what? If it means saving my life, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And if you care about your life or care about the lives of your loved ones, you'll tell them the same thing. There have been times where I saw a police contact escalating. Maybe it was another officer who had stopped another suspect or another citizen, and I happened to be in the area, and I would assign myself to the call, and just to offer maybe another voice to a call to the scene to quell things a little bit. There are times where I would just ask the individual if I could. I would ask the officer if I could talk to the citizen on my own for a hot minute, and I would just try to be a voice of reason. Now, not everyone complied, but you would be surprised how often it was when a person who's not directly involved in the scene comes in and just offers a voice of reason. And I would tell people, I've told people on many occasions, man, just do what you're told. Or ma'am, just do what you're told. You ain't gonna lose no cool points with your homies or whatever the case may be. But if you are being difficult with the officer, and if it's a case where the officer can be lenient or not, if it's a case where the officer can basically decide whether he takes your freedom or whether he gives you a break, maybe just gives you a warning, your attitude can completely affect that. And sometimes if you have a minor warrant and the officer can say, you know what, don't worry about it, just handle it and go to make sure you set up a court date, and I'm giving you a break, and if I see you again hanging out on the block, I'm going to take you to jail. But the officer could completely give you a warning, or he could be completely justified if he chooses to take you into custody, take you to jail. Your attitude can play a massive role in whether your freedom is taken or not. So there are days where just offering a calming voice, so to speak, could change the environment, change the complexity of the conversation, of the discussion completely. So when I tell people repeatedly, in order to avoid conflict with an officer, one of the best things you can do is to comply. Don't fight, don't run, do what you are told. Whether that officer is justified or abusing his power, comply. There are remedies, there are ways that you can handle it down the road if that officer has violated your rights. But the worst thing you can do is to get into a physical fight with him or take off running. It's the worst thing you can do, because anything can happen after that. Fatigue plays a role. The officer drops his gun. You may have all the intentions in the world of just trying to get away, but anything can happen. The officer, you could have your phone in your hand. It could look like a firearm to that officer. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. You could be running. That officer's under the impression that you have a gun in your hand. You're putting your life in someone else's hands when you can just comply. So her actions definitely contributed to her loss of life, period. There's no way around that. My next point I'd like to address, from what I can see, now I want to say this right off the bat. There are facts and circumstances that I'm sure that we don't necessarily know all the details to involving this shooting, because we see one camera angle. So as time goes on, hopefully more data will be given, more data, so we can make a more clear and more complete assessment of exactly what went down. And I understand that officers during their encounters, Graham versus Connor, takes into consideration that an officer has to make split-second decisions in matters that are often rapidly evolving and changing and volatile and hostile. I get that. I understand that. But in order for officers to improve and get better, we have to critique. And sometimes that critique can be hard and it can be harsh. But you will never get better in any area of life if you aren't willing to take an honest assessment of who you are and what it is that you do. So I make my critique here with no apologies. I understand how the officer doesn't have the benefit of hindsight, but I also understand that I want everyone out there to understand that I do what I do for the benefit of the citizen and for the officers as well. I want to do my part in bridging the gap that seems to be widening in this whole discussion of police and citizen relations. So in regard to the officer, it seemed to me, from what I can see, is that there was an issue when it came to his skills in defensive tactics. He seemed unable to take her into custody physically. Now, I know it's very difficult in dealing with someone who is combative, who doesn't want to be taken into custody. I get it. He didn't seem like the biggest officer in the world. And the size, there didn't seem to be much of a size difference between the two of them. So I can see how that might have caused him to have a little bit of difficulty in subduing her. But there are things that an officer can do. There are things that we all can do to mitigate those gaps. Be in the best shape possible. 2, be sharp and proficient in your defensive tactics. And from what I was able to gather, there seemed to be an issue in both of those areas. Now, granted, his physical fitness, I can't speak on. It looked like he was probably wearing a vest, but it did look like he was carrying some additional weight. And those things, and a lack in either one of those areas can impact how well you can deal with a physical altercation. No question about that. That's real. A lot of people don't want to deal with the reality of that because I believe it gives them an excuse to stay fat and stay out of shape and not to work on their skills. But when lives are possibly at stake, not only the lives of a citizen or your partner, but your own life can possibly be at stake, we should do whatever's in our power to shore up that hole in our skill set so that we can be as efficient as possible while we work in this career field, this challenging career field of law enforcement. In the area of defensive tactics, it seemed to me that he wasn't quite sure exactly what to do to really end the encounter as peacefully as possible or as quickly as possible. One thing I want to address is the taser issue. Now, granted, once again, taking into account of Tennessee versus Garner, Graham versus Connor, when it comes to uses of force, the reasonable officer standard, keeping all that in your mind, keeping all that fresh in our minds. When a taser is fired, two prongs fly out, and they have to meet at a certain distance apart. It affects your neuromuscular system, and it causes a lack of control in your body, and oftentimes it can take care of the problem. But there are some things that play a role. Whether the prongs strike the individual properly, if they strike them too close, it'll hurt, but they can possibly keep going. What their mental state is, whether they're under the influence, can play a role. I've seen people fight through a taser. They went down and then they get up and then they fight completely through it. Type of clothing they're wearing, whether they're wearing something thick or not. So there are a few things that can play a role in the effectiveness of a taser deployment. Now, the taser can still be used potentially to assist in subduing a suspect because the electrodes that are on the front end or like the nozzle area of the taser, if you bring it right to that person's body, if you connect it and you pull the trigger, it can still hurt. And a lot of times an officer will use that in the area for the purposes of pain compliance.
Hurry up!
There's some people that it's effective on, and there are others that aren't. As the video progresses, we'll hear some people who say that they believe that she might have had some mental issues, and that could definitely play a role in her response to that. So, but it doesn't mean that the officer should have backed off of the encounter by any stretch of the imagination because she has a mental problem. Maybe if he knew about it, perhaps it would have been best for him to call for some additional backup, but that hasn't been verified, so we're just going off of what one other individual said. But when the taser is deployed, and if you hear the video, it sounds like he did attempt to shoot her. Now, whether that was enough to take her down, I don't think so, because it didn't sound as if she responded like she was tased, because usually there's some pain involved. There's a high amount of pain involved, and you see the way the person's body responds. You can tell that there's some electric currents going through their body. And I didn't see that. But once again, it was dark. But once she went down and they're wrestling, the prongs have already been deployed. So unless you stop, reload a new cartridge and reshoot, there's no danger once he broke contact from her. There's no danger of those prongs hitting him at that moment. It's being stated that she had taken the taser away from him, which also goes into the issue of, possibly goes into the issue of his physical fitness. It goes into the issue of his, what appeared to be a lack of proficiency in his defensive tactic skills from my perspective, from my vantage point. My question is, did he have a moment where he reloaded the cartridge? Because if she had taken the taser, she was still on the ground. He disengaged, he pulled back. Once again, I understand hindsight is 20/20. The officer on the scene in the encounter doesn't have the benefit of that. But once he disengaged, was there something else that he could have done? Something to consider. Could he have given her verbal commands? To not resist, give her verbal commands. Stay where you are or I will shoot. Because was the threat still there once he broke contact? That's my question. Now, if he reloaded and the taser was a projectile weapon, once again, then there's no argument there. But if the cartridge had been expelled, then there was no threat once he created distance. She was still on the ground. Now, has she gotten up and ran towards him, lunged towards him? That changes everything. But just from where we are, just from what I see in the video, it's a definite area of concern for me. Let's continue on with the video. I wanted to make those few points and we can wrap it up from there.
The gunfire ran outside. Some say the victim often walked her dog, and they believe she had mental issues.
I don't know if she has some mental illness or anything, but sometimes you would see her, get into it with people around the apartment, but nothing too, bad.
Police say a preliminary investigation shows the 11-year veteran officer was justified in the use of deadly force. Laura Podesta, CBS News, New York.
Now, an autopsy is being done to determine if the woman was pregnant. Some reports say that the officer also lived in the same apartment complex.
This is a tragedy, and that there's a lot of information that is not yet known. And we should refrain from coming to conclusive decisions on who was right, who was wrong. But the points I brought up, especially in regard to her resisting, or the point that I brought up in regard to the officer's seeming lack of proficiency in defensive tactics, those things I do not believe can be argued right now. And these are things that can be changed by actions of the individual, the actions of the officers, by being skilled and prepared for these encounters, sharpening your defensive tactic skills, working on your physical fitness, and as far as a citizen, is by complying even if you believe the officer is wrong, by doing what you're told, not fighting, not running. Because if you go back into history and we think about Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Terrence Crutcher, Alton Sterling, Stephen Clark, they all resisted or were fleeing or attempting to flee. And if we go into 2017 and we look at the officer-involved shootings that involved unarmed individuals, the individual had already committed a crime or a traffic offense and then became combative or attempted to flee. So oftentimes when we all go into our own corners during these debates, everyone goes into their corner. The pro-officer side, the pro-citizen side, and the two kind of battle it out. No one really wanted to give quarter or even give an ear to the other side. I think oftentimes, not always, but I think that in many situations, there are things that can be learned and changed from both sides of the argument. So let's take those things into consideration. What can you as an individual, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're as a citizen, what can you do to mitigate or minimize the chances of you or one of your loved ones being hurt in a police encounter? And if you're an officer, what can you do to reduce the chances of you feeling as if you have to escalate to deadly force? What can you do? As time goes on, we're going to learn more. If you think I'm in the wrong or the right, I would love to hear your comments so we can have a dialogue on this, because I think that having a conversation and a discussion, a reasonable one, is part of the solution in all of this. So in the meantime, stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation.